Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing Destiny 2, the full game, on the GeForce GTX 1050 Ti for FPS monitoring. This time I won't be using cam, since this game is blocking overlays, so I'll be just using the in-game FPS counter, which is very small but is zoomed in the bottom left corner of the video. And if you enjoy the content and want to support the channel directly, there are Humble and Amazon affiliate links down in the description. So Destiny 2, full game, I'll be doing 1080p, 900p, 720p and 1440p. To skip none of those sections of the video, check the description below. So first I'll show you 1080p with the G4560, first 60 frames per second configuration or close to that, and then I just crank up the settings to ultra. And so far with the G4560 I was able to be close to 60 frames per second with some drops below that, but mostly over 50 frames per second, which in my opinion is still smooth enough. Then by cranking up the settings to the max, I stay over 30 frames per second pretty much all the time. It mostly drops on open areas plus a lot of effects on screen. For example, when you're using your supercharged ability against many enemies at once. That's usually a big hit to the GPU. Then after that I show you Ryzen 3 1200 overclocked to 3.9 GHz. Using the same settings for 60 frames per second on 1080p, since for what I could see the G4560 was at 100% while I was playing the game in these open areas, so that was limiting the GPU when trying to get 60 frames per second. In that case, the Ryzen 3 1200 gave me a slight boost in performance, which allowed me to maintain 60 frames per second or over that more consistently. So for the rest of the video I'll just use the Ryzen 3 1200, since if I use the G4560 for example on 900p and 720p, you won't really see much of a difference compared with the 1080p 60 footage. You'll still drop below 60 frames per second no matter what. I even have some drops on the Ryzen 3 sometimes when there are many enemies on screen, and on the G4560 it was a little worse. So just keep this in mind, the G4560 will be enough to be over 50 frames per second no matter the resolution, because when we are being limited by the CPU, lowering the resolution does nothing. It just makes the job easier for the GPU, which will give us more frames. But since the CPU cannot process all the stuff as fast as the GPU needs, it'll just drop below the 60 frames per second target on open areas. And while on 900p and 720p, I'll use 60 frames per second configurations, and then I just crank up everything to ultra. And finally at 1440p, it was impossible to get 60 frames per second since the GPU wasn't strong enough. So I used pretty much a mix between medium and high, in order to be over 30 frames per second all the time and have a higher resolution compared to 1080p, so you have a lot of options here. In all my Destiny 2 videos on the final game, I used the latest NVIDIA drivers, which are the game ready drivers version 388. So keep that in mind. And well, for the testing methodology, I just decided to run into one of the main areas, which is a big area compared with most of the places on the beta. So we get more CPU usage. Unfortunately, I cannot show you CPU, GPU and RAM usage since this game is blocking overlays, so I cannot use MSI Afterburner, CAM's overlay doesn't work either. This game is just blocking code injection, so you cannot really see that in an overlay in this game. So when I was testing the game, I just Alt-Tab out of the game, look at the CPU and GPU usage, and so far for what I could see on the G4560 on these open areas that I tested, there was some drops in the GPU usage on all the cards, excepting on the 750 Ti for example. So if we're targeting 60 frames per second, the G4560 seems to be close to that target. It sometimes drops to 50 frames per second due to the CPU. It's usually when you look far into the distance, not really a long period of time. So I think that it's still good enough to use the G4560 on this game. Then on the Ryzen 3 1200 with the 3.9 GHz overclock, it happened less often, so we had a better average frame rate. So yeah, if you have a modern i5 and i7, something like that, maybe a Ryzen 5 1600 overclocked, it should be enough to be over 60 frames per second without a problem. Then in the options menu, I used, well, what you see on screen, 105 degrees FOV. On the anti-aliasing option, we don't have MSAA anymore. Bungie said that it wasn't working well with the game, with the way they render the game, so they decided to remove MSAA. So we have FXAA and SMAA. Then the rest of the options is pretty much the same as the beta. So I'll just tell you the ones that I lowered in order to get the best performance. Screen space, ambient occlusion give me a decent boost in performance. Anti-aliasing from SMAA to FXAA is like 3 or 5 frames. Then the fulfilled, I recommend lowering this. It's a hit to the frame rate as well, quite noticeable. Shadows obviously are also a hit to performance, so I recommend keeping that on medium or high. It's usually the best balance performance quality. And then we have the draw distance. distances. We have environment, character, foliage detail, and foliage shadows distances. So those 4 options control different draw distances. The main one that helped me to get the best performance by lowering it was environment detail and foliage shadows distance. The other ones also gave me a boost by lowering them, but it wasn't as big of a boost compared to environment and foliage shadows. But yeah, overall it runs pretty good even on budget hardware. So yeah, thank you so much for watching guys, and see you next time.
spotted quite a few fallen headed your way. Keep your guard up.